On Being a Pagan. Alain de Benoist. Translated by John Graham, edited by Greg Johnson. 2004. Originally published in French under the title Comment peut-on, étre, paien? Under the pen name Albin Michel, 1981. Narrated by Skeptical Waves. Chapter 2, Time and History. In the first place, paganism is not a return to the past. It does not consist of what could be called one past versus another, contrary to what Alain Gerard Slama wrote so casually. It is not a manifestation of a desire to return to some kind of lost paradise. This is rather a Judeo-Christian theme, and even less, contrary to what Catherine Chalier declared so gratuitously, to a pure origin. In a time where one never stops talking about roots and collective memory, the condemnation for being overly attached to the past is self-refuting. Every person is firstborn, an heir. There is no individual or collective identity that does not take into account one's connection to those who create us, the source from which we emerged. Just as yesterday we had the grotesque spectacle of Christian missionaries worshipping their own gree while denouncing pagan idols, it is somewhat comical today to witness the denunciation of the past, European, by those who ceaselessly boast of the Judeo-Christian continuity and are always presenting for our edification the ever-relevant examples of Abraham, Jacob, Isaac, and other proto-historical Bedouins. On the one hand, we must reach an understanding of just what this word past means. We refuse to give any credence whatsoever to the Judeo-Christian problematic that posits the past as a definitively past point on a dime that would necessarily conduct humanity from the Garden of Eden to Messianic times. We do not believe this has any historical meaning. For us, the past is a dimension, a perspective that is totally relevant to the present. There are no such things as past events until they insert themselves as such in the present. The perspective opened by how we represent these events to ourselves transforms our present in exactly the same fashion the meaning we give them by representing them contributes to their own transformation. The past necessarily participates then with that characteristic of human consciousness known as temporality, which is neither the quantity of, measurable, time, as is commonly assumed today, nor the duration evoked by Bergson, which is the property of non-human nature. Temporality belongs to man alone. Life is worry, surge, is extensive of itself as Heidegger put it, therefore, it does not fit into any pre-established temporal framework. Man is nothing but a project. His consciousness itself is a project. To exist is to existere, to project, to hurl oneself forward. It is this specific mobility of the extensiveness that Heidegger calls the historizing, Gespin, of human existence, a historizing that absolutely marks the very structure of human life, which, as a transcendent and revelatory reality, makes possible the historicity of a world. Man's historicity stems from the fact that he combines past, present, and future in the immediate present, which thus form three dimensions that mutually enrich and transform each other. From this perspective, the typically Judeo-Christian reproach of too great an attachment to the past is entirely devoid of any meaning. This kind of attachment to the past can only exist in a monolinear historical perspective, in fact, in a history where what is past cannot return again. But this is not the perspective we take. We believe in the eternal return. In 1797, Helderlin wrote to Hebel, "There is no such thing as annihilation, therefore the youth of the world must be reborn out of our own decay." In fact, it is not a question of going back to the past, but of connecting with it, and also, by that very fact, in a spherical conception of history, to connect to the eternal and cause it to surge back, to have consonance in life, and to disentangle itself from the tyranny of the logos, the terrible tyranny of the law, so as to re-establish the school of the mythos in life. In ancient Greece, Jean-Pierre Vernon observes, "The effort to remember the primary purpose of everything is not the construction of the individual past of a man who remembers, the construction of his individual time, but conversely what allows him to escape time." In the same way, it is a question of referring to the memory of paganism not in a chronological way, so as to return to an earlier time, but in a mythological way, to seek for that which, through time, surpasses time and still speaks to us today. It is a question of connecting to something that cannot be surpassed rather than to something that has been surpassed. The terms beginning and end therefore do not hold the same meaning for us that they do in the Judeo-Christian problematic. In the pagan perspective, the past is always future. Herkunft aber bleibt stets Zukunft, writes Heidegger, what existed in the beginning, remains always in the future, remains constantly under the control of what is in the future. In his introduction to metaphysics, Heidegger specifically examines the question of the past. A people, he says, can triumph over the darkening of the world and its decline only if its sights are permanently set upon its destiny. Now, a people will be able to gain a destiny from its vocation only when it creates in itself a resonance, a possibility of resonance for this vocation, and grasps its tradition creatively. All this implies that this people, as an historical people, must transpose itself, and with it the history of the West, from the center of their future happening into the ordinary realm of the powers of being. In other words, it is necessary to recapture the beginning of our historical spiritual existence, in order to transform it into a new beginning. And Heidegger adds, but we do not repeat a beginning by reducing it to something past and now known, which need merely be imitated. No, the beginning must be begun again more originally, with all the strangeness, darkness, insecurity that attend a true beginning. In fact, the beginning is there. It is not behind us as something that has been there a long time, but it stands before us. The beginning boss burst into our future. In the distance it pursues its greatness, a grandeur it is imperative we catch up with. So it is not a return so much as a recourse to paganism. Or, if one prefers, it is not a return to paganism but a return of paganism toward what Heidegger in this page of luminous importance called another beginning. There is nothing anyone can do for or against one's genealogy, and a time always comes when each person will have to choose comprehension over resumption, and with it an illumination that does not include denial in order to make the solitary choice of embracing what connects him to or pushes him away from his origins, writes Blandine Barrett-Kriegel, who declares herself to be Judeo-Christian. When the undertakings of previous generations come to grief, the natural response is to start over on this side of the bifurcation, to loosen the duration, and expand the space. This says exactly what is involved here, to start over on this side of the bifurcation for another beginning. But no doubt such a scheme will appear blasphemous to the eyes of many. In Hebrew, the word beginning also carries the sense of profanation. To begin something, as we will have the opportunity to see, is to compete with God. The truth of this observation is underlined by a passage in Genesis that refers to Enoch, son of Seth, as the first to invoke the name of Yahweh, 4:26, which is interpreted in Jewish theology as meaning not the beginning of monotheism but the start of paganism, so one began. This verb means to profane. One began giving to men and statues the name of Saint blessed be he and to call gods idols, was the Rachi commentary on Genesis 4:26. From the name of Simeon bar Yohai to the present, pagan culture has ceaselessly remained the target of criticisms and accusations. This fact alone, not that it needs to be stated, is sufficient evidence that a certain past remains present in the very eyes of those who denounce it. It is not by chance, writes Gabriel Matzneff, that our fanatic, hateful, and doctrinaire 20th century never missed a single occasion to paint a caricatured and slanderous image of the ancient Romans. It instinctively detests everything that is superior to it. The Renaissance of the 14th and 15th centuries was precisely that, a rebirth. What it involved, as Renan said, was seeing antiquity face to face. This rebirth was no journey backward or a simple resurgence of the past, but on the contrary the point of departure for a new spiritual adventure, a new adventure of the Faustian soul that was now triumphant because it had awakened to itself. Nor is neo-paganism today a regression either. On the contrary, it is the deliberate choice of a more authentic, harmonious, and powerful future, a choice that projects into the future, for new creations, the eternal from which we come.